Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, it is my great honor that I can be your MC at this meaningful session, session 1 as well. And now we will start session 1, strengthening capacities for pandemic response. And we will talk about strengthening vaccine, pharmaceutical, and diagnostics manufacturing and regulatory oversight. And once again, for your information, channel 1 for Korean, channel 2 is for English. Please use the receivers on your tables. 네, 다시 한번 국내 참석자분들께서는 한국어 채널은 1번입니다. 1번으로 설정하신 후 청취해 주시길 부탁드리겠습니다. Then now, without further ado, let us commence session 1 of the World Bio Summit 2023. First and foremost, it is my great honor that we now commence this session with the welcome remarks delivered from Dr. Na Song-seop, Deputy Director General and Deputy Group Chief of Sectors Group of Asian Development Bank. Now please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Thank you for a kind introduction. Good afternoon to everyone. Also, I see so many friends, so good to see you again here. Today, we have a very important session to talk about strengthening capacity for pandemic response, strengthening vaccines, pharmaceutical, and diagnostic manufacturing and regulatory oversight. I am Song-seop Ra, as you introduced. I am the Deputy Chief of the Sectors Group, Asian Development Bank. It is my great honor to welcome all of you to this first session to the second World Bio Summit, strengthening the vaccine, pharmaceutical, and diagnostic manufacturing and regulatory oversight. Organized by ADB, this session will serve as an important platform for us to shape the future of the global public health by advancing access to these safe and effective vaccines. The rapid development and deployment of the vaccine against COVID-19, a remarkable achievement. During the COVID-19 pandemic, ADB played a pivotal role in Asia and the Pacific. In fact, ADB, as in the keynote speaker mentioned, we developed innovative financing, front-load our assistance to our development member country. We utilized about $6.4 billion to support our developing member countries so that they can procure vaccine very, very quickly. We established a regional vaccine advisory group. Many of the group members are here to help overcome regulatory bottleneck to these vaccines. And we also collaborate with the Korean government to train 90 individuals in vaccine manufacturing. We also helped countries with their plans to deliver vaccine, address vaccine hesitance, and to address their readiness to build new manufacturing capabilities. Now, we are contributing to developing more comprehensive and strategic approaches to pandemic preparedness through initiatives like our innovative workshop together with NUS Core on fit-for-purpose vaccine technology in Singapore. However, the COVID-19 pandemic underscored the immense challenges we face in ensuring equitable access to vaccines. Stronger domestic and regional production of vaccine is one core aspect of building health security. This has been recognized by both the public and private sectors in Asia and the Pacific. And this is the reason why we are gathering in Seoul for the second World Bio Summit. ADB has received numerous requests from the companies and government to extend our support in vaccine manufacturing. The development and manufacturing of vaccines, however, is a very complex challenges, especially for regulatory aspects. Globally, there is a significant gap in regulatory capacities across many countries. Only 30% of all national regulatory authorities are estimated to have a capacity to carry out essential regulatory functions. An effective and fully operational regulatory system is essential to ensure the safety, efficacy, and quality of vaccine, pharmaceuticals, and diagnostic products. Regulatory oversight plays a pivotal role in fostering a sustainable and quality-focused local vaccine manufacturing by establishing a robust regulatory systems. But a robust regulatory system requires collaboration and cooperation among many stakeholders, all you are gathering here. We have now many stakeholders from industry, regulatory body, authorities, and also academics, and also ADB like MDBs, development partners here. I am happy to say that we have a stakeholder here from pharmaceutical industry, regulatory body, research institute, and government official, all coming together for multi-stakeholder dialogue. This session is not just about learning from our successes, but sharing the lessons for challenges we have faced. It is my hope that discussions and insight shared during this summit will help us ensure equitable access to the vaccines for next pandemic. Let us remember, our work here has a potential to save lives, reduce suffering, and pave the way for a healthier, more resilient Asia Pacific. I look forward to today's discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that wonderful opening remarks. Thank you. And thank you for your leadership as well. And next, ladies and gentlemen, we'll hear a presentation from Dr. Patrick Osaway, Director of Health Asia Development Bank. So for a brief introduction, he also served previously as a global lead for the World Bank's Health Societies, and today he'll be delivering his presentation under the topic of vaccine, pharmaceutical, and diagnostic manufacturing support, including regulatory systems strengthening to LMICs for pandemic preparedness and response. So he's already up on the stage. Let's welcome him once again with a big round of applause.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. This is my second participation at the World Bio Summit. And it's a pleasure, and I would like to recognize all the distinguished speakers as highlighted by previous speakers. I'm going to talk about strengthening vaccine, pharmaceutical and diagnostic manufacturing and regulation in our region. Why are we focusing so much on regulation? If you look at the health system financing over the past 40 years, there's been a lot of focus on universal health coverage, looking at how you can strengthen the 6 building blocks of the health system. Regulation is not highly one of them, and therefore many countries and many multilateral development banks did not invest in regulation. Many investments was on the health side, but not on regulation. Why was that the case? Because in many settings, the perception was that regulators are independent and can generate money from their own fees, and therefore they can take care of themselves. This has led to a situation whereby we are seeing that in many countries, regulation is still requires a lot of support. So I'm going to just shed lights and set the context of what happened during COVID and what are some of the discussions that are going on post-COVID. Our experience as an organization is that we procured close to 1 billion vaccines and delivered that across many of our member countries. There are serious challenges with delivery, but there are also serious challenges with regulation because vaccines were coming out at a very fast pace. Secondly, the COVID variant was also changing very rapidly. So there was a lot of pressure on countries to make quick decisions regarding vaccines. Second, expanding vaccine manufacturing was also there was a lot of pressure also to expand, especially fill and finish, because there were not sufficient vaccines to supply our region, which is about 55% of the world population. Third, strengthening the regulator was quite important. So because of that, and because of rapid changes in the sector, we established the Regional Vaccine Advisory Group that a few people have mentioned before me. And this was to do three things: to advise and update and synthesize emerging evidence, because the evidence was fast and furious the way it was coming out. Second, to promote information exchange amongst our developing member countries so that we are more or less on the same page. And third was to foster regional collaboration so that if something was going on in one country, the other countries in the neighborhood will also learn from that experience. So who was in this Regional Vaccine Advisory Group? Many members are in this room. And this was convened by ADB, chaired by Australia. John Skerritt, who was the chair, will be speaking shortly, and also co-chaired by India and Indonesia, and consisted of Australia, Canada, People's Republic of China, India, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, UK, Vietnam, and we also had WHO as part of the a group of 12 that were basically meeting every quarter to review what was going on and then to provide the necessary advice to countries and also to ADB. So how is this useful going forward? As we look at what's going on beyond COVID, many countries are embarking on vaccine manufacturing. And there's a lot. Vaccine manufacturing is not a simple process. It's a very, very complicated process. And that requires a lot of capacity building and technical assistance and technology transfer, as has been mentioned. So the demand is increasing, as Dr. Sungsub talked about, but there are also other emerging regulatory issues. For example, climate change. How do you regulate climate change and health-related issues? How do you regulate digital tools? Because health has become extremely digital. How do you regulate what's coming into the health sector? Because digital tools are extremely expensive. And then how do you also ensure that there's timely regulation so that it does not take? There were lots of lessons that were learned during COVID, whereby the first vaccine was approved within 325 days. In the past, vaccines were approved between 4 to 7 years. How do you incorporate those lessons? So I'm just going to use a case study of Bangladesh, and the CEO of the Bangladeshi company that I'm talking about is here. So in Bangladesh, a country that is becoming a middle-income country in 2027, and will lose the Gavi subsidy. So the government has done a very thorough analysis to look at would it be cheaper and cost-effective for the country to purchase vaccines from the global market or to manufacture their own vaccines. And the conclusion is that it's cheaper in the long term to manufacture its own vaccines. There's a state entity that has been manufacturing all essential medicines for the public sector, but now they want to move into vaccine manufacturing. But to do that, they need, and there's been discussion about skills, technology transfer, and also a strong regulator. And so this is what Bangladesh is planning to do. That starting from 2025, they will embark on designing the facility and constructing the facility. And then after that, start with a fill and finish approach. Why start with only fill and finish? Because there's a lot of capacity building that is required. For a company that has not been manufacturing vaccines to learn from the company that is transferring technology. A lot of human capacity building is required, as presentation from NIBAD was very, very eloquent about this issue. How to build capacity, transferring of skills during fill and finish to be able to embark on substrate manufacturing. So it's a 5-year period for Bangladesh to achieve that. Concurrently, the regulator is maturity level 3, maturity level 2, and they would like to be maturity level 3 in a period of 2 to 4 years, and they will hear more presentation afterwards how we as ADB are planning to work with partners, some in the room and some outside the room, to strengthen the regulator, so that by the 2029, Bangladesh will have an established vaccine manufacturing facility and also a very strong regulator so that they can manufacture vaccine for their own national immunization program, but also at the same time for export. Given that, the other innovation that this company has done is looking at how to green their manufacturing, looking at various issues like adopting green building design, looking at the use of energy efficient equipment and cooling, and proper waste management, looking at issues of sustainable manufacturing supply chain, focusing on what kind of packaging, instead of using, for example, glass, use biodegradable substances. So a lot of innovation going on within this particular company. And just my last second slide is capacity building. I would like to emphasize this issue. This is so important that society, just like what Korea is doing, starting from high school to colleges to build the biosector, is completely transforming the sector to be able to have the necessary skills to do manufacturing of vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. So in closing, just to say that regulatory strengthening technical assistance is so important and is so scarce, and there's talent there's a severe shortage of talent. And as ADB, we are creating this network to be able to support many of the regulators in our region, partner regulators and regulators, provide resources, provide long-term short, medium, and long-term training. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Osawe, for that meaningful presentation. We'd like to welcome him back here up on the stage later on for moderator. But now, thank you once again. And next, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome Honorable Phaiban Kupasut, the esteemed Vice Minister of Health of Laos. So now, please welcome our Minister with a big round of applause up to the stage.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to address this gathering today to discuss the crucial role of regulatory oversight and strengthening our capacity for pandemic preparedness. As witnessed firsthand, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed the vulnerability and gaps in global health system. It has underscored the urgent need for robust regulatory framework to ensure the availability of quality and safe medical equipment, drugs, and vaccines. Our ministry recognizes the importance of regulatory oversight as the cornerstone of pandemic preparedness. We are focusing on strengthening regulatory system accreditation processes for research, production and monitoring, and medical products. We are committed to ensuring that the framework aligns with the international standards and best practices. We all acknowledge the lesson learned from COVID-19 pandemic 3 years ago. The availability of COVID-19 vaccine was crucial in controlling and reducing the pandemic. Despite the short period taken the development of COVID-19 vaccines, we were confident the emergency use authorization practices. In order to regulate best practice and move toward a full regulatory system and strengthening our capacity for handling future pandemics, we need focus on certain key areas should include: 1. Enhancing the availability of medical equipment, drugs, and vaccines. We are working and streamline regulatory processes, reduce administrative burden, and foster collaboration among regulatory authorities and facilitate the timeline, approve, and availability to essential medical products. 2. Strengthening accreditation for research, production, and monitoring. We are implementing rigorous accreditation standards and ensure that the research institution, production facility, and laboratory meet a higher quality and safety requirements. 3. Ensuring efficiency and effective management of the regulatory systems. We are investing in digital technologies and modernizing our regulatory infrastructure to enhance efficiency, transparency, and data-driven decisions making. Through this effort, we aim to achieve the following objectives: A. Access to the sufficient quantity and quality of medical products. B. Enhance the efficiency and safety of regulatory process. B. Building public confidence in our regulatory systems. As we move forward, we recognize that regulatory oversight is not standard-alone endeavor. It requires collaboration and coordination among various stakeholders, including national and international regulatory authorities, research institutions, manufacturers, and healthcare providers. We are committed to working closely with ASEAN Development Bank and other partners to strengthening our regulatory capacity and contribute to a more resilient global health system. Finally, I would like to extend my appreciation and gratitude to the organizing committee of this meeting for giving us a wonderful opportunity to attend this important meeting. I wish it great success. Thank you very much.
Let's give a big round of applause. Thank you, Vice Minister, for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, before we'll delve into presentations and discussion of session 1, we'll now have a group photo shoot. So for this commemorative group photo, we'd like to ask the Vice Minister, Phayban Khopachut, once again, please come up to the stage to join this photo shoot. And we'd like to ask our speakers and moderators, please come up to the stage. Please come up to the stage for this photo shoot. 네, 함께 하시는 연사님과 저희 좌장분들도 무대 위로 모시겠습니다. 사진 촬영 함께 해주십시오. Once again, we'd like to extend our sincere gratitude to esteemed guests and panelists and speakers for joining session 1, this crucial session of the 2023 World Bio Summit. Before we commence actual presentations, we'll now have a photo shoot together. Please make one line. Please stand still for our first group photo shoot. Please look at the camera at the very center. Make a big smile. Once again, 1, 2, 3. And next photo shoot, please give a big round of applause. Please clapping. Please, with the clapping, we'd like to have one more photo shoot. Please maintain the pose and smile. Thank you very much. Now please return to your seat. Thank you very much for your kind cooperation. Thank you. Once again, thank you to all distinguished guests and our participants for your patience. And now we will move on to our forthcoming presentations. And these presentations will be focused on lessons from countries in vaccine, pharmaceutical, and diagnostic manufacturing. And this important discussion will be expertly moderated by Dr. Patrick Osaway, Director of Health Asian Development Bank. So now we would like to welcome our moderator with a big round of applause. And now, if you're ready, we'd like to pass the microphone over to you. Please use this one.
Thank you very much for that. So the next session, we are going to have three distinguished speakers who are going to lead us through a conversation on what are the lessons learned on vaccine, pharmaceutical diagnostic manufacturing. So the first will be Rachel Park, who is the Director of Business Development, EU Biologics, Republic of Korea. She's done so much work, and just to distinguish that in one category, her company is the largest supplier of cholera vaccine worldwide. I'll call upon Ms. Rachel Park to take the podium.
First of all, and thank you for inviting me to speak about lessons from oral cholera vaccine experience. So I'm Rachel Park from EU Biologics. Before I start, and I would like to briefly introduce our company. EU Biologics is a publicly traded biopharmaceutical company based in South Korea. We focus on vaccine development and supply with a total capacity of up to 500 million doses. So our company, EU Biologics, is incorporated in 2010, and our headquarters is based in Seoul, and we have 2 manufacturing sites in Chuncheon. The number of employees is about 320, and we have 2 business areas. One is vaccine development and supply. The other is contract R&D and manufacturing services. So you can see the photos of our manufacturing sites. In SIP plant, we dedicate the production of oral cholera vaccine. And then in brief plant, we have a bacterial conjugation production line. So we have CREAM 197, recombinant CREAM 197, in-house developed and manufactured. So we use CREAM 197 for development of conjugate vaccines. So typhoid conjugate vaccine in phase 3 clinical stage, and 15-valent pneumococcal conjugate vaccine in phase 1, and pentavalent meningococcal conjugate vaccine candidates in phase 1 clinical stage. So I would like to give you an update about cholera outbreak worldwide. So cholera is an urgent global public health problem. So cholera is an epidemic and in pandemic-prone diseases, and more countries are reporting outbreak in 2023. So in 2023, 29 countries reported outbreak versus 18 in 2022. And case of fatality rate in the last few years have been highest in a decade. So in 2021, and global CFR was about 2%. In Africa alone, it was about 3%. So countries affected and re-affected after years, and also countries which have not reported the cholera outbreak in years, and they are reporting now. So for example, in Haiti, Middle East countries like Lebanon, Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, South Africa, Syria, etc. So as you see this, and cholera is a disease of inequity, and classical factors continue to prevail. For example, poverty, conflict, and population movements. And also it has a very strong link with the climate changes, droughts and floods and cyclones. So in January 2023, and WHO declares cholera to be a grade 3 global emergency, which is the highest risk level. And it has the potential to a widespread due to severe limitations in the vaccine supply. And WHO ICG, International Coordinating Group, this is a body which manages global stockpile of vaccines for outbreak responses, and they temporarily suspended the standard 2-dose regimen. It's a 2-dose regimen, 2 weeks apart, in cholera outbreak instead of recommending a single dose. So as you see this in January 2023 in media briefing, and Director General of WHO, he personally mentioned about EU Biologics based in South Korea for maximizing production and of our efforts to develop the new vaccine to increase the supply. So given that Ubiologics is currently the only supplier of oral cholera vaccine to WHO global stockpile. And I can say that OCV, oral cholera vaccine development, is an outcome of successful public and private product development partnership. I think you ever heard about vicious cycle in the development of public vaccines. So there's no vaccine, no supply, and then countries do not have a chance to use a vaccine, and then no demand and no supply. So it's so-called the vicious cycle. And to convert a vicious cycle into virtuous cycle, the intervention from global community was needed. So Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation awarded a grant to launch a cholera vaccine initiative called the CHOBI program to International Vaccine Institute. And International Vaccine Institute first awarded Shanta Biotechnics based in India. However, and their capacity was kept at 2 million doses per year. But for healthy markets, there's a consensus that more than one supplier needed for reliable supply and market growth. So Ubiologics, the technology transferred from IBI in 2010. And then in 5 years, and our first product, Ubicol, was pre-qualified. So as you see the graph in the low parts, and after we joined in the market, you can see the market has grown significantly. And we scaled up and developed a programmatically suitable presentation and simple formulation of oral cholera vaccine at an affordable pricing to address the unmet needs, which is supply constraints. So we introduced the world's first possible presentation of oral cholera vaccine, which was a game changer as we reduced weight by 50% and volume by 30%. And also we are working on the simplified formulation of oral cholera vaccine. The current formulation has 5 distinct components, and 2 from Inaba, 2 from Ogawa, and 1 0139. But we simplified this into 2 components, which will translate into the reduction of cost and increase of supply by 38%. So after scale up, our capacity, oral cholera vaccine capacity, will go up to 90 million doses. And I would like to talk about regulatory collaboration between Korean Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, which is NRA of record for Ubiologics, and WHO PQ team. So PQ support's available since 2013 by KMFDS, including pre-consultation and technical guidance. And also there is a collaboration agreement in place between WHO PQ team and KMFDS for information sharing. So information sharing means the site inspection reports or product evaluation or assessment reports that they are shared together to facilitate a fast-track review of pre-qualification. And also, I'm aware that new initiative providing the customized supports just kicked off in November 2023. So in general, the pre-qualification itself takes 18 to 24 months after we received licensure, whether it's export-only licensure or full licensure from NRA over records. But for our first product, Ubicol, it only took 11 months for pre-qualification because second manufacturer was needed. And also we are supported by WHO stockpile team, which is WHO ICD team. And for Ubicol S, then we expect 10 months, including the regulatory timeline by Korean Ministry of Food and Drug Safety. This is feasible because the concurrent review, the parallel review is ongoing with Korean Ministry of Food and Drug Safety and WHO PQ team, given that the cholera is a WHO emergency level 3, and so it's supply constraint vaccine. And when you submit our dossier, Korean FDA was, Korean Ministry of Food and Drug Safety was ML4, Maturity Level 4 authority, but as of now it's WHO listed authority. So this really facilitates the concurrent or fast-track review. And for the Ubicol S and its site addition variation, we only expect 2 months for an approval. And what are the lessons learned? And first of all, I think the public-private product development partnership needed for pandemic diseases with uncertainty and also for product improvement to address unmet needs is needed. So as I mentioned before, and it is a successful outcome of a public-private product development partnership. And then we developed the programmatically suitable presentation and to address the unmet needs, which is a supply constraint for now. And we are working on expansion of our facility and ubiquitous development. The second one is market shaping efforts needed for vaccines, perceived lack of a profitable market by manufacturers. So to respond to outbreak or pandemic, I think we need vaccines, but we need a manufacturer who can manufacture the vaccine and supply at sustainable level. So in our case, and there is actually the little market for oral cholera vaccine, but a commitment of $115 million to fund the WHO stockpile of oral cholera vaccine by Gavi, and it was kind of a trigger point for additional manufacturers to join in the market. The third one is a demand forecast or the innovative financing mechanism needed for sustainability. So I think the COVAX was a great example, and advanced market commitment can be one of the examples too. The last but not the least, and collaboration between regulatory agencies, in our case, in the Korean Ministry of Food and Drug Safety and WHPQ team to reduce the regulatory timeline to enter the market in time for pandemic or epidemics. So as if there's collaboration agreement or cooperations and reliance on NRA's assessment and information sharing really can facilitate the parallel fast-track review so that the product can be in market in response to pandemic or epidemics. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Park, for those lessons. For market shaping efforts, I suggest you talk to my team and also talk to Gavi, the Gavi representative here. There's a lot of conversation going on in those areas. The next presenter is Dr. Sudeep Kumar, who is the Senior Vice President from Biological E of India. He's done a lot of work on research and development, technology transfer, and looking at how the private sector collaborates with regulators. So the floor is now yours, Dr. Kumar.
So good afternoon, and first of all, I would like to thanks to the organizing committee and also the Asian Development Bank for giving me this opportunity to make a presentation in front of such an audience. So thanks a lot for the organizing committee. From the morning, I'm hearing a lot of things in terms of the preparedness with respect to the pandemic situation, both from the research and development, manufacturing point of view, but somehow I have not heard something related to the supply chain. So in my presentation, I will focus a little bit on that, the supply chain, particularly with respect to the manufacturing. So I will focus mainly onto the vaccine side because I am from the vaccine company. The focus area is on the vaccine. Now, if we look in terms of the pandemic situation in the last so many years, we have come out with 4 pandemic situations, but none of the pandemic cases were as severe as the coronavirus because that was spread all over the world. That has given a lot of millions of deaths worldwide, as well as the lot of disruption to the economy, global progress, and people's lives. So that is how this particular pandemic situation of corona was given a lot of lesson in terms of learning, although there was a lot of casualty and many of us has lost our near and dear. Now when I'm coming on to the COVID-19 vaccine success, which has generated interest in emerging vaccine technology, because this particular pandemic situation was a little bit different than the earlier one, where in this scenario, there's a lot of new technology has been developed, and that too in a very rapid timeline. If you see, most of the vaccine, when it is developed, it will take years to come. But in the COVID vaccine, it was coming very rapidly. and this novel vaccine has proven invaluable in effort to counter the pandemic situation. Now, there is an effective vaccine which, while it cannot prevent, at least it can make a resistant in terms of the outbreak. Now, outbreak must be detected rapidly. So this particular thing is very, very important on terms of the diagnostic detection of whether it's a viral infection or whether it's a bacterial infection. So the diagnostic effort was not much during the COVID vaccine preparation. So that has gone a little bit time taking in terms of detecting the virus, sequencing is available to the counterpart for development. Now, if you see, the manufacturing network has shown how effective manufacturing and supply chain driven everything from the PP kit to the vaccine. When I coming on to the what is the possible during that COVID vaccine, we have learned a lot of things during this COVID vaccine. The number one is an R&D can easily design the sequence when it is available within 2 days of genetic sequence, and it is possible to move into the first human trial in 66 days, which is all after getting the sequence, which is proven by Moderna. And also there is a possibility the first safety data after 63 days after the phase 1 clinical trial. Again, it has been by the Moderna. It is possible to go for a clinical trial to vaccine registration in about 7 months, which Pfizer has done. And also, here I will make one statement that it was a tremendous effort from all the regulatory agency, particularly we have worked with WHO and also with the Indian NRA. During this period of time, lot of the time has been cut short and they have given an emergency use for the vaccine. So this effort has also reduced us a lot of time in terms of bringing the vaccine into the market. Coming on to the manufacturing readiness part, to improve response can be achieved through investment in technology platform and also improving key technical focus area. So supply chain, which I was talking to you, since we have also manufactured the COVID vaccine, which is a Corbevax vaccine during COVID period, and we have got the emergency use authorization, we have a lot of things with respect to the supply chain to ensure all the raw material should be in place and component needed for manufacturing. In this particular thing, I will focus a little bit more on it, because in this COVID vaccine, almost all the transportation was hampered. Whether it's supplying from the US, Europe, or from anywhere the raw material or consumables, we have faced a lot of problems. So that is the major focal area in terms of preparedness, apart from the development, regulatory, and manufacturing. Particularly in case of any pandemic situation, it's always a very difficult task to get all your consumables and raw material on time. Lot of effort now has been made in India in terms of indigenous manufacturing of some of the consumables and raw material, where we are basically depending on to the US and Europe. And also, there is a regulatory support is required in case of any pandemic situation. Now, back to the manufacturing capacity for vaccine and therapeutic process, public health risk to be the world and parent new vaccine from the reaching. So these are the preparedness which we need to make it. And if I look in terms of the most of the vaccine company or the pharmaceutical company, the capacity has been increased during the COVID period. So that is a good part, that most of the company are now well prepared in terms of taking the vaccine or therapeutic protein or maybe the pharmaceutical company if it is required in large scale in terms of manufacturing. The third point is, which is also very important from the morning we are talking about, public-private partnership, which plays a very vital role, and together it is possible to increase the infrastructure and require the capital that make this new system possible. So public partnership is also plays a very important role. Now the COVID pandemic vaccine has placed significant challenge for supply chain globally. So this is the main thing which I was talking about. If you can look the point number 2, there is a lot of buffer, resins, and also the vials and syringes, which normally most of the company, they get it import from the US and Europe. That hampered a lot during the COVID period. And somehow when you are producing in a large scale for the vaccine, your supply should be regular in terms of that. So these are the major hurdle which we have faced, and these are the challenges which we need to overcome over a period of time. Some of the countries, they have already started doing it, and particularly when I'm talking about from the Indian perspective, the Prime Minister has also putting a lot of effort in terms of making indigenous thing so that we should not be dependent, because in any of the pandemic situation, you never know what will be the fate of the transportation in terms of the supplying of that. And some of the material which we have placed an order in advance, but still it was taking more than 12 to 9 months in terms of the supply of those material. So as a manufacturer, it is very important for any company to have a regular supply of all material to make it effective. Now, when the preparedness has a major key takeaway is building an integrated approach for biomanufacturing. So where the manufacturing process, product, development, all is required in terms of working together, and it is very much possible looking the last COVID scenario that everything is possible to do it in 100 days, which is SEPI's basically target in terms of next pandemic situation, provided the research development, manufacturing, public partnership, regulatory agency, and most importantly, the supply chain, all they work together, there is all possibility in terms of getting the vaccine out in case of a pandemic for emergency use, not as a regular vaccine, because in regular vaccine, it is not going to take less than 2 to 3 years. So this is the last slide which I am showing. So this is how the vaccine can be given in terms of making it into the public in the largest scale in a shortest possible time. So there are the challenges which somehow has been already overcome, and it is good thing that we are all is almost well prepared for any pandemic situation to deal. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar, for those perspectives from your organization and the work that you've done in the past. The next presentation is going to come from Dr. Morena Makoana, the CEO of BioVac South Africa. Africa is a continent of 1.3 billion people. The average age in Africa is 19 years compared to 35 to 40 in Asia. So the demand for vaccine is quite critical. Unfortunately, on pre-pandemic, of all the vaccines purchased in Africa, 1% was made in Africa. So I'm going to ask Dr. Morena to come to the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the organizers, particularly the Asian Development Bank, for inviting me to come and do a talk. not only on behalf of our company, but to share Africa's experience in terms of pandemic readiness and hopefully what we can avert going forward. I think it's good to reflect back as to when you essentially look at the slide, and I'm only going up to the flu vaccine in terms of the H1N1 2009, which didn't end up being a pandemic. However, it was close to being a pandemic. And at the time, WHO had the GAP initiative, I think the Global Action Plan, which it had initiated in 2006, already in anticipation of a flu outbreak. But in 2009, as you look at the bottom of our slide, that in Africa, we were ill-prepared, particularly from a vaccine manufacturing perspective. Very few, if any, had any manufacturing capability back then. In between then, we then had Zika and Ebola outbreaks. Zika didn't affect our continent that much, however, Ebola did. And I think Ebola essentially illustrated health systems that were very lacking, particularly on our continent. When the pandemic hit, our continent, being the African continent, was the last to get vaccines. However, at least there were some activities that were initiated from a manufacturing perspective, particularly when it came to full-finish activities. Even those activities started a little bit late, but there were at least some activities which essentially was a step in the right direction as compared to 2009. And there were other initiatives that were established, particularly spearheaded by WHO, being the mRNA hub, which I will speak briefly about, but I'm sure it will be expanded tomorrow. Again, where are we today? And I think a lot of this has been spoken about, is that we are aiming as the global community to get better in terms of the various activities that have been there. However, on the continent as well, the continent itself has taken on itself a task to be better prepared at the next pandemic. But the way to be better prepared for the next pandemic is to make sure that you produce vaccines in between pandemics. This was before the pandemic, where very few vaccine manufacturers existed. Our company, based in South Africa, was also just one of the very few. And again, we were very focused on our fill-finish activities in terms of building capability. We had our counterparts in Senegal at Institut Pasteur Dakar, and we have some activity also in Egypt in Vaxera and some in Tunisia. Since the pandemic, the African Union has come together and come with a very bold ambition of trying to manufacture 60% of vaccines that are consumed in Africa by 2040. This, again, is a way to respond to a pandemic by ensuring that there is vaccine manufacture in between pandemics so that you can respond to the next pandemic. What you would see then on my left, on your right, is the various initiatives that have either been announced, and so some of them are aspirational, but some of them are also include current vaccine manufacturers. So there's a lot of activity in terms of trying to respond to this call to manufacture 60% of vaccines. And again, this is for routine vaccines, but once we build the capability, we will also be able to manufacture and hopefully be able to be better respond to the pandemic. So this is one of the initiatives that came, but I think one of the other important initiatives, and I'm sure Professor Petro ter Blanche will talk about it tomorrow, is the mRNA hub activity, which I know some of you in the room may know about. And this is really an initiative to make sure that firstly there is end-to-end capability, not only in Africa, but also in the developing world. So this is really a hub that is based in South Africa. However, the aim is to make sure that the technology is developed and it's shared with other developing countries. This is also one of the initiatives to make sure that we are ready for the pandemic. But in order to be ready, you need to make sure that you also have the starting material in terms of manufacture. And mRNA was one of the technologies that was identified in terms of being able to respond to the pandemic. In our own company, and I'll come back to the importance of building this end-to-end capability, is that full finish has been what we've been trying to do for the longest while in order to build our capability, but we've also been trying to do product development. And so we've been partnering with many companies in terms of what we can do in terms of plugging the gap. And one of the logos that's actually missing here is a partnership that we announced in September with U Biologicals around a meningitis conjugate vaccine, which they are developing. So we've announced an MOU where we're hoping to collaborate with U Biologicals in terms of plugging that gap. So that's the next logo that will come. So we are already working together with U Biologicals, but you can also see that we're also working with the IVI, being the International Vaccine Institute. So we do have 2 collaborations here in South Korea that we are working that are going to assist us in terms of plugging the gap. So, however, you can see that the holy grail that's missing there is really the drug substance capability on the continent. So through the mRNA hub and through others, we will all be able to get to this point. I'll come back to the drug substance now. I think this is one of the lessons, particularly, for many of the more mature manufacturers. This won't be news to you, but I think for us as a continent, this is quite important. This shows that as you build capability, that you start slow. However, the more you practice and the more you get empowered, the quicker you can respond. So we have 3 tech transfers on full finish that we've established. The first was with a French company, Sanofi, and you can see that it took us about 7 years for us to get to commercialization. We started at a small scale and went to large scale, so it took us the longest of the tech transfer. We then entered into a second tech transfer with Pfizer. That was done in 5 years. When COVID-19 came in, we also partnered with Pfizer. You can see that it took us only 20 months to get to commercialization. So essentially what it means is that it's so important to be able to manufacture in between pandemics, and the more experience you are able to get as you go through, the quicker you are able to respond. So for us as an African manufacturer and for us as other African manufacturers, we need to make sure that we get into the routine of vaccine manufacture so that we are better able to respond when the pandemic hits. Going up to the element of drug substance, there are many ways to deal with it. So one of the initiatives that I outlined earlier is we've partnered with IVI also in terms of developing an oral cholera vaccine. So besides plugging a big gap in terms of cholera, but we're also hoping to plug the gap in terms of drug substance, which is really an area that Africa needs to get into. The mRNA hub I've also spoken about, and we will be a beneficiary of the technology that will be coming from the mRNA hub and from our partners at Afrigen. However, it doesn't mean that full finish is not important. We need to do more and we need to practice more. And so a lot of these activities will also need to be enhanced. And therefore, as part of the lessons is that we need to make sure that a lot of full finish activities are there. However, I think what is important, particularly for our continent, is for us to be supported by all of you to be able to get towards the upstream side so that we are better able to do drug substance manufacture. This slide is a very important one when it comes to regulatory. This comes out of a study that we conducted with Wellcome Trust that was conducted by BCG, and it shows how the pre-qualification process and how long companies took to get to pre-qualification. Now, again, it shows also how pre-qualification has become an important lever for many companies. So if you take one of Biological E has just presented here, and they've been established for a long time, and obviously they've been manufacturing vaccines in that domestic market and got to pre-qualification. But also we have U Biologicals, which is right at the bottom that you can see, that they took only about 5 years to get to pre-qualification, and you just heard from the presentation how well they've been doing. So essentially the regulatory system, the global regulatory system is something that is important, and we are looking towards lessons as Africa in terms of how can this enable us to get to this point. So we also need to be quick in terms of getting there. However, obviously as manufacturers, we cannot work on our own. We need to work with our local regulators as well so that we can achieve quicker timelines of getting to pre-qualification. This is my last slide, essentially in terms of putting everything together in terms of lessons learned. So I think what is important, and I think many speakers have spoken about this, and I'm sure they'll talk about this going forward, is that what is important is to make sure that the ecosystem exists, that funders just don't only talk by themselves and manufacturers only speak by themselves, but then we need the global community to be able to put everything together. As African manufacturers, as you can see, we need our institutions to be strengthened, whether those are regulatory institutions, whether those are procurement institutions. At a country level, we need to make sure that even at a country level, our NRAs are strengthened and they get to the required maturity levels as they go through. And obviously, as companies, we need to take our own responsibility in terms of talking to the ecosystem. And therefore, this is what we think will also make sure that Africa in itself gets to be able to respond to pandemics better the next time around. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Ms. Park, Dr. Kumar, and Dr. Mokohana for sharing the lessons, excellent lessons that are going to be useful for the audience. We'll take advantage of this to introduce Dr. Mokohana to Dr. Kabir from Bangladesh so that you can also start learning from each other. Thank you, and I'll go over to MC.
Thank you. And let's give another big round of applause to our moderator. Thank you for leading the session, Dr. Osawe. Thank you. And once again, thank you to our esteemed presenters for sharing their knowledge. And next, we'll proceed to the case presentations on regulations capacity building. And this important session will be chaired by Professor John Skerritt of the Melbourne University. So brief introduction of our professor. Professor John Skerritt is adjunct professor in the Faculty of Medicine and Health at the University of Sydney, and also chair of the Scientific Advisory Board of the UK Centre for Regulatory Science and Innovation. Now we'd like to welcome our moderator with a big round of applause. Please come up to the stage.
Oh, well, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. We've just heard from the preceding speakers just how important institutional strengthening is and the critical role that strengthening national regulatory agencies is, especially outside a pandemic, so they're ready for the next pandemic, and especially in cases where they mature from global fund procurement systems and enter into their own procurement arrangements. So we're going to have 3 case studies on regulatory strengthening. And I'm delighted that the first is from the head of our local regulatory agency in Korea, Dr. Youngju Park. Now, Dr. Park became Director General in May this year after a very distinguished 20-year career at the agency. And I think that we've seen evidence today of the strength of the Korean research, development and regulatory systems. So I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Park.
Thank you for nice introduction. As we have excellent translators, if you allow me, I will take this privilege to talk in my mother tongue, Korean. 일단 그 2023년 그 월드 바이오 서밋에 참석하신 여러분 모두 반갑습니다. 오늘 발표는 팬데믹을 겪으면서 얻은 시사점을 바탕으로 해서 식약처의 규제 역량 강화 노력과 글로벌 경쟁력을 갖춘 제품이 개발되기 위한 다양한 전략을 공유하고자 합니다. 발표는 코로나19 이후에 식약처의 규제 변화 그리고 국내 의료 제품 개발과 허가를 위한 식약처의 지원 노력 그리고 국제 협력 현황 순으로 말씀드리겠습니다. 예, 식약처의 첫 번째로 그 코로나19 식약처의 규제 변화에 대해서 말씀드리겠습니다. 코로나 이후 식약처에서는 새로운 법률 2건이 마련되었습니다. 첫 번째로 공중보건 위기 대응 의료 제품의 개발 촉진 및 긴급 공급을 위한 특별법, 굉장히 긴 이름의 법률인데요. 줄여서 위기 대응 의료 제품법이라고 저희가 약칭하고 있습니다. 이 법률은 공중보건 위기 사항 대응에 필요한 의료 제품에 대한 신속한 허가 심사, 그리고 긴급 사용, 그리고 안정적 공급 관리를 위한 근거가 되는 그러한 법률입니다. 두 번째로 만들어진 법률은 식품의약품 등의 안전과 제품화 지원에 관한 규제과학 혁신법인데요. 거기 써 있기로는 규제과학 혁신법이라고 약칭이 쓰여져 있습니다. 이 법은 식품의약품 등의 안전한 사용을 위한 연구 개발 사업의 추진, 제품화 지원, 그리고 규제과학 전문 인력 양성 등에 대한 법적인 근거를 담고 있는 그런 법률입니다. 첫 번째 말씀드렸던 위기 대응 의료 제품법에 따른 업무를 담당하는 사전 상담과, 그리고 신속 심사과, 그리고 신종 감염 백신 검정과 3개의 부서를 식약처에서 팬데믹에 대응하는 과정 중에 신설하였습니다. 식약처는 위기 대응 의료 제품법 제정과, 그리고 두 번째 조직 개편을 통해서 코로나19 백신과 치료제의 신속한 심사, 그리고 조건부 허가 등 승인 체계와 허가 후 안전관리 체계, 그리고 전문가 자문을 명확히 하여 팬데믹에 대응할 수가 있었습니다. 구체적으로 팬데믹에 대응하기 위해서 개발 단계 제품에 대한 사전 상담을 제공하고 우선 심사, 그리고 수시 동반 심사, 심사 TF팀 등을 활용해서 신속하게 심사를 하였고, 가이드라인을 마련하였으며 국제기구 등과의 협력을 통해 공동 대응 방안을 마련하였습니다. 해당 제약회사에서의 노력이 가장 중요한 요소이겠습니다만, 여기에 이러한 저희의 규제 지원이 더해져서 대한민국은 국내 개발 백신과 치료제를 모두 보유한 국가 중에 하나가 되었었습니다. 앞서 설명 커멘트가 되었었는데요. 셀트리온의 레키로나주와 국산 1호 코로나 백신인 SK바이오사이언스의 스카이코비1이 허가되었었습니다. 코로나19 이후에 식약처의 규제 변화에 이어서 국내 백신 등 의료 제품 개발과 허가를 지원하기 위한 식약처의 노력에 대해서 조금 말씀드리겠습니다. 첫째, 혁신의약품 제품 개발 초기 단계부터 임상 그리고 허가까지의 단계적으로 저희가 밀착 지원하기 위한 제품화 전략 지원단이라는 것을 저희가 설치하였습니다. 지원단은 3개의 팀으로 구성되어 있는데요. 제품화 지원팀과 임상심사팀, 혁신제품심사팀으로 구성이 되어 있습니다. 제품화 지원팀은 의료제품에 대해서 상담을 제공하는 역할을 하고, 임상심사팀은 임상시험 계획 설계를 지원하는 역할을 하고, 혁신심사팀은 신속한 심사 대상을 지정하고 심사해서 궁극적으로 혁신 제품이 적절하게 검토되고 신속하게 시장에 출시되어 사용될 수 있도록 노력하고 있습니다. 둘째로 국산 바이오 헬스 제품의 글로벌 진출을 지원하기 위해서 저희가 글로벌 수출 전략 담당관이라는 것을 정규 조직으로 설치하여 국제적 수준으로의 규제 기준을 조화하고 국내 우수 의료 제품의 수출 등을 지원하기 위한 규제 기관으로서 역할을 수행하고 있습니다. 세 번째로 소개해드릴 식약처의 지원은 기프트 프로그램 운영인데요. 앞서 소개해드린 제품화 전략 지원단의 혁신심사팀에서 글로벌 혁신 제품에 대한 신속 심사 대상을 지정하고 신속 심사하는 프로그램을 기프트라고 명명하여 활용하고 있습니다. 네 번째는 국내 백신 개발 역량 강화를 위한 프로젝트인데요. 대상은 수입 의존도가 높은 제품 중에 국내에서 개발 중인 백신과 국내에서 최초로 플랫폼을 개발하는 혁신성 있는 백신 등에 대하여 백신 완주 프로젝트를 추진하고 있습니다. 그 내용은 백신 개발에 참고할 수 있는 가이드라인을 제공하고 제품별로 규제 이슈 해소를 위한 맞춤형 지원을 실시하고 특히 백신 임상 지원 협의체를 통해서 임상시험 단계별로 비임상, 품질, 임상 설계 등에 대한 저희의 기술적 지원을 제공하고 있습니다. 다섯 번째로 바이오헬스 산업을 이끌어갈 전문 인력을 양성하기 위해서 8개의 규제 과학 인재 양성 대학을 선정하여 바이오헬스 제품의 평가 기술 개발 역량을 갖춘 규제 과학 분야 핵심 인재를 육성하는 것을 지원하고 있습니다. 각 대학에 바이오헬스 제품 관련하여 대학별로 특화된 규제 과학 교육 프로그램의 석박사 학위 과정을 운영하고 있습니다. 다음은 식약처의 국제 협력 활동을 팬데믹 대응을 위해 수행했던 활동을 중심으로 말씀드리도록 하겠습니다. 공중보건 위기 상황에 공동 대응하기 위해서 규제 기관의 최상위 협의체인 ICMRA를 통해 코로나19 백신 허가와 약물 감시 등에 대한 정책적 이슈를 함께 논의하였습니다. 코로나19 백신 개발 시 규제 현안에 대한 협력을 하기 위해서 WHO의 레귤러터리 어드바이저리 그룹의 렉에 적극적으로 저희가 참여했습니다. 특히 평가원이 제안한 코로나19 백신의 면역원성 비교 3상 시험 설계는 WHO 가이드라인에 반영되어 후발 백신 개발에 기여했다고 알고 있습니다. 또한 아시아개발은행이 설립한 지역 백신 자문 그룹의 멤버로 코로나19 백신 개발에 공급 지원을 위한 전문가 협력 활동을 저희가 수행하였으며 팬데믹 기간 동안 WHO의 EUL 품목 등재를 위해 여러 코로나 백신에 대해서 WHO와의 협력 심사를 수행하였습니다. 저희 식품의약품안전평가원은 이러한 팬데믹 대응 이외에도 여러 백신과 관련한 국제협력 활동을 수행해 왔습니다. 평가원은 바이오의약품 표준화 분야의 WHO 협력센터로 지정되어 있고 국제 기준, 국제 표준품 개발 수행, 교육 제공 등으로 개발도상국을 포함한 규제기관의 기능 강화를 저희가 할 수 있는 범위 내에서 지원하고 있습니다. 또한 WHO의 PQ 심사 및 GBT 평가에도 평가 전문가로 참여하여 기여하고 있습니다. 앞서도 언급되었지만 최근 식약처는 WLA에 등재가 되었습니다. WLA 등재를 위해서 규제 시스템 글로벌 기준 GBT 평가에 참여해 모두 4등급을 받았고 이후 수행 능력 평가를 받아 스위스, 싱가포르가 함께 WLA 등재 국가가 되었습니다. WLA에 대해 조금 더 말씀을 드리면 21년 11월에 식약처는 WLA 등재 신청 의향서를 제출하였고 GBT 평가와 퍼포먼스 평가를 거쳐서 약 2년 만에 최종 등재가 되었습니다. WLA 등재는 매우 장기간이 소요되는 그런 과정이고 준비가 충분하지 않을 경우 더 긴 기간이 소요될 수도 있다고 생각이 됩니다. 규제기관의 전체 업무 분야에 대한 역량을 평가하는 것이기 때문에 WLA 등재를 목표로 하는 규제기관에서는 여러 분야의 업무 역량을 고르게 발전시켜야 할 필요가 있다고 저희가 생각하고 있습니다. 이 외에도 식약처는 국가 신인도를 제고하고 국제 기준을 선도하기 위해서 국제기구 등과 다양한 국제협력 체계를 구축하고 활동하고 있습니다. 저희 식약처는 이러한 노력을 통해 다음 팬데믹에도 효율적으로 대응할 수 있는 역량을 키우고 글로벌 보건 향상에도 기여하고자 합니다. 감사합니다. Thank you.
Thanks very much. As I foreshadowed, Korea is really leading a lot of excellent work, and to be the third country only to achieve maturity level 4 is something very special. I'd now like to turn to Ms. Yvonne Nkrumah from Ghana, the Deputy Chief Executive of the Food and Drugs Authority there. Again, she not only has extensive experience in her own country, but has also worked within the World Bank Group. So it'll be quite an interesting journey to hear the experience of Ghana as in a regulatory strengthening. Thank you very much.
So, good afternoon. I would like to convey my sincere gratitude to the organizers of this summit for inviting me here to share our experiences from Ghana. So I'm billed to talk on how Ghana attained maturity level 3. There's been a lot of talk about the need to strengthen national regulatory agencies and to build their capacity to be better ready to support outbreaks. So my outline will look at why ML3, our journey. I will touch on some of our success factors, some of the challenges that we faced, and some recommendations for countries that are looking to make that journey. I've also been asked to talk about the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative, which is a big initiative of the African Union that seeks to transform the regulatory landscape on the continent. So the Food and Drugs Authority of Ghana has been in existence since 1997. So we've been around for some 25 odd years. Within those, during those years, we've been able to attain ISO 9001, which basically looks at the certification of technical and regulatory processes. In 2015, we were designated a Regional Center of Regulatory Excellence, RCOR, I'll be mentioning that a bit, for 3 areas: for medicines registration, for clinical trials oversight, and for pharmacovigilance. What this means is that we have the competences to train our peers in these regulatory functions. In terms of our laboratory accreditation, we have done very well. In 2017, our lab was accredited ISO 17025. And this lab has the largest testing scope of 58 tests under one single roof in Africa. And this goes for our food, drugs, and cosmetics. In 2022, our laboratory attained WHO pre-qualification status. So as you can see, in the 25 years, we have done a bit of work. We've made some investments, and we have strengthened the regulatory systems that we have in place. So how did we have the journey? The journey took us about 6 years to attain ML3. And we started in 2014. In 2014, the WHO did a formal benchmarking of our regulatory system by looking only at vaccines. So it looked at how we authorize how we do our market authorization for vaccines, and also how we do our safety monitoring post that. In 2015, we had another formal benchmarking by WHO, and this time they looked at medicines. In preparation for the actual benchmarking in 2019, we invested in improving on our quality management systems, and we had a lot of support from WHO. In 2017, we were introduced to the self-benchmarking tool, and we went through our own self-benchmarking. In 2019, we had the formal benchmarking, this time using the WBT. As you can tell, some of the processes that we went through preceded the global benchmarking tool. during the formal benchmarking, we realized that some of the areas where we scored ourselves higher, we were downgraded by WHO. I think the key lesson there is to ensure that when you're doing this, you are very stringent, because we tend to score ourselves much higher than when WHO actually does the benchmarking. Following the GBT tool, we came up with our institutional development plans, which is basically a plan that allows us to address the weaknesses and gaps in our systems. We had a couple of months to address those weaknesses. We had a follow-up visit in February 2020 by WHO to sort of check in with us to find out how we're doing with implementing the priorities in our institutional development plans. And finally, in April 2020, having addressed all the major gaps that were prioritized in our IDPs, we were designated maturity level 3, meaning that we're a stable, well-functioning, and integrated regulatory system. So what were some of the key factors, key success factors that help us make this journey? Leadership and commitment is key. We have leadership support and commitment from the ministerial level. So the Ministry of Health was very focused and committed to working with us to attain this ML3. We also had a very robust legal law in place, a legislative instrument that is very agile, that allows us to develop new guidelines and also address emerging issues in real time without having to amend the law. I've talked a bit about our quality management systems. This is key. And we also had a reliance policy for key regulatory functions. This was for market authorization, regulatory inspections, clinical trials, and laboratory testing. And all of these were supported by a list of documents in the organization that allows you to see which of our products are registered using a reliance pathway. There's also the need to have a risk-based approach to regulatory decision making. We have a strong risk profile that we apply. So, for example, when we are registering medicines from companies that we are familiar with that have very strong compliance levels, we will not go the full scale. So those are the mechanisms that we put in place to ensure that we work quite efficiently. We also established a strong working relationship with our key partners. We have heard about the need to work with stakeholders, to work with government, to work with other stakeholders that are involved in the regulatory space. So we work a lot with law enforcement, we work a lot with the judiciary, and we have established memorandum of understanding that outlines our rules and responsibilities in this regard. There's also the need to invest in a very strong capacity building framework. Investment in human resources is key to attaining maturity level 3. And we've invested a lot in our staff. A lot of them have higher education. They run master's program in specialized courses. They also do a lot of refresher programs. Financial resources are key. A lot of the investments that you need to attain maturity level 3 cost money. You need a state-of-the-art lab, and all of those investments have to be sustained. So there's the initial investments and also sustaining those investments. As a regulatory agency, we are allowed to keep a percentage of our fees and charges. Ideally, it would be good to have 100% of it, but we don't have all of it. We're allowed to keep about 70%, which we roll back into our operations. We also benefit from grants and donor projects and some resources from government. Of course, our journey was not without challenges. We faced some challenges. During the benchmarking, our systems were not automated, so we don't have electronic submission platforms, for example. I've talked a lot about our quality management systems, but all of these systems were not automated. So we have a record of all our processes and our proceedings, our SOPs, but they were all paper-based. Our record management systems were also not automated. So to a large extent, we didn't do very well in terms of the automating our process. These are things that subsequently we have made investments in, and we are hoping that we will have, for example, an e-submission system in place. There were also gaps in human resources. We've talked about the need to have human resources. And during the benchmarking for pharmacovigilance, in IT, and regulatory inspections, we didn't have the full capacity of human resources. We had less than we should have in place. I've talked about sustainable financial resources. So what are some of the recommendations for countries that want to walk this journey? Political commitment is key. Without political commitment, you might not find the necessary support and the resources to make the investments that will lead you to maturity level 3. I've talked about the need for a strong regulatory framework that allows timely adaptation of new guidelines to deal with emerging issues. You should have dedicated and committed human resources, and of course, the need for continuous capacity building. And looking for support for countries that have already done it. It's always easy to learn from countries that have done it, that have attained ML3. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to make the same mistakes that others have made. The African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Program is managed under the auspices of the African Union. And it's basically an initiative to transform the regulatory space. This is an initiative that is organized by regions. It looks to harmonizing our regulatory processes. And for example, in West Africa, we have the ECOWAS region. The ECOWAS region under the AMRH becomes one market that allows pharmaceutical companies that want to put their product on the market to make one single application and have access to all of that market. So this is key. The countries come together, they do their joint evaluations, they do their joint assessments, they do joint inspections, and as part of that process, we also have the less resource countries learning from those who are highly resourced. I've run out of time, so I'll end here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ms. Nkrumah. It was fantastic to learn from first-hand experience from an agency that's achieved maturity level 3, because really there's a strong element of peer-to-peer learning as other agencies move to ML3. Final speaker in this session is, of course, someone very familiar to anybody who's worked in pre-qualification and international regulatory qualification. I'm delighted to introduce Rogerio Gaspar, who's the director of the WHO Department of Regulation and Pre-Qualification. Rogerio.
So thank you, John, for the presentation. Let me say first that it's a pleasure to be here in Seoul after 2 years of work with MFDS in strengthening the regulatory systems. And I'll come back to that experience, which is something that we need to value. So first of all, let me address the issue, the main issue, the core issue that drives everything. And this is looking at a path to One Health with a number of global challenges. You have there a number of 30.5 billion of extra costs with medicines and vaccines and diagnostics of poor quality. This is data coming from our member state mechanism against substandard and falsified medicines. We have to remember ourselves always the costs of not strengthening the regulatory systems. And let me take the opportunity also to remember once again what we have lived in the last year with an episode of contamination with ethylene glycol in cough syrups. More than 300 children between 6 months and 7 years of age that died because of that. in different countries, and to remember that that kind of event was supposed to be behind us, because in 1937, a similar event was the basis for the Food and Drugs Act at the United States of America. So almost a century after, we are still dealing with some very difficult to admit issues in terms of lack of regulatory oversight, lack of quality on manufacturers, and all the progress that we have done over a century brings us back those nightmares from the past time and time again. So when we look at strengthening regulatory systems, we look at specific functions, and specific functions that are slightly different for medicines and vaccines in WHO configuration. So the main difference there is the official batch release by regulatory agencies, which means that the laboratory capacity for a national regulatory authority is sometimes the most difficult step forward, moving from ML3 medicines to ML3 vaccines, for example. And this is something that we need to refer time and time again, because it seems easy to do that transition between medicines and vaccines, and lacking the capacity, the laboratory capacity, that becomes really a major difficulty there. This is an end-to-end evaluation process. More and more regulatory systems are looking at research and development. More and more regulatory systems need to be very strong in monitoring market, and it's not only about pharmacovigilance, it's also about the other components that makes market monitoring a very important function. So the WHO process for global benchmarking tool, it's a 5-step capacity building process. I have to say time and time again, because there's still some confusion even in the regulatory community about the different rules for GBT and WLA. GBT was built and implemented since 2016 for capacity building only, not for procurement, not for reliance, not for the assessment of performance. Those are the tasks that were assigned by the member states to the WHO Secretariat to implement with the WLA, and to remember that the WLA is a response from the member states with a fact-based evaluation to respond to a political decision that was taken years ago of establishing stringent regulatory authorities based only on a political decision and not on facts and evaluation process. We are now changing this, so the process about the intervention of these different steps, and with participation of that coalition of interested parties that I will refer again in a subsequent slide. So in terms of the benchmarking, and just to remember this, WHO along the time had different models of recognition and certification of national regulatory authorities. First, the functional agencies for oversight of vaccines manufacturing. Also, the PAHO recognition of reference authorities linked to the revolving fund on the acquisition of vaccines and other health products on the Americas region. And certainly the ML3, ML4 since 2016. This is a concise recap of more than 95 countries that have concluded until now some kind of assessment using the global benchmarking tool. Some of those are self-benchmarking assessments. Most of those self-benchmarking assessments are assisted by WHO, and an important number of them led to the establishment of institutional development plans. The IDP, or Institutional Development Plan, is really the tool to track and monitor the progress of those regulatory agencies that start on the self-assessment and then move to the formal assessment by WHO, granting the final status. There's different ways of doing that, and because I'm in Korea, I take the liberty to refer that when Republic of Korea took those 2 years, it's not only for WLA, it's WLA but also ML4, and the internal decision that was taken at Republic of Korea that they didn't want it to move to ML3, but they wanted to move to ML4. So there was no formal announcement of the ML3 status, because that was part of the evaluation for ML4, and that's why those 2 years are there, because the process, in principle, with an agency like MFDS should have taken lesser time without those complexities there. So the current status of affairs is this one. So when you look the stringent regulatory authorities, the functional, the ML3s, ML4, the reference regulatory agencies, we are talking about 50% of the world population covered by maturity level 3 regulatory status, with two caveats in that number. The first caveat is those 50% of the world population include India and China, and the regulatory systems from India and China are only, WHO only recognizes the regulatory systems for vaccines, not for medicines. And the major issues there are related with the fragmentation of the national regulatory systems, as you know, fragmented in the provinces in India and fragmented with Jewish authority for the states in India due to the constitutional arrangements that established the Indian Union after independence. So those two countries that are within those 50% of the world population that is under maturity level 3, it's only for vaccines, not for medicines. And then the other number that you see in the slide, which is 70% of the member states, of the 194 member states of WHO, still don't have a functional regulatory system, looking at maturity level 3 as being the minimum for that regulatory maturity. Of course, there's a number of issues in terms of the core activities that are established for regulatory system strengthening. Just to remember, this is not something coming from the heads of the regulatory system at WHO or from the technical staff. This is a core mandate granted by the World Health Assembly through a decision of the member states, WHA 6720, that we are implementing step by step. And also to remember that as we progress, we need also to establish a comprehensive strategy for learning. And you have in this conference the director of WHO Academy, several members of the staff from our department that are looking not only with the Global Training Hub on Biomanufacturing here in Republic of Korea, but also with the future regional training centers that will come next year and other initiatives to a comprehensive learning and capacity building strategy that is being implemented. So I refer to the coalition of interested parties. Let me give some numbers. This is not a WHO activity, but this is a WHO coordinated activity in terms of the Secretariat. There are 24 members. You see the logos of the membership there, a number of organizations that are well known. The basic principle, after being cleared by our framework for engagement with non-state actors and being reviewed by ethics at WHO and granted access to that coalition of interested parties, they promote then activities supporting public institutions, mostly national regulatory authorities. So those 24 members are currently supporting 350 activities in 31 member states with a total of investment currently of $45 million on regulatory entities. Just to tell you, those 350 activities on 31 countries in 6 regions, 30% of those activities are concentrated in 2 countries, which I can disclose here are Senegal and Rwanda. And you can imagine the pressure that that puts on the regulatory agencies to move to the next steps. Also to refer that about 2/3 of that volume of investment, $30 million, are concentrated on AMRH-led activities, and we just saw from the previous presentation the scope of activities of AMRH. So reliance has been important. It's been important in the past, it's been important in the response to COVID-19, and is the basis to build a global regulatory system. Let me give you some numbers at the continental level, because Africa has been talked a lot in the media, and the African Medicines Agency coming also. We are not expecting to have the entire membership of the African Union to become ML3 in the coming years. And just to tell you at global numbers, the WRs, which are the WHO representatives of at the country level, have a training exercise every year. I'm normally talking to them, to the new ones coming, and every single year the question is the same. So Rogerio tells us when the 194 member states will become ML3. And my honest response is, first, probably 50 years. Second, that's the wrong question. Because the right question is, when will we have a global regulatory system covering all member states having a functionality of ML3 standing. What is the difference? The difference is that we don't need to have every country ML3 to have a global ML3 system. The reliance mechanisms and the good reliance practices from WHO, together with the good regulatory practices, allow for agencies from different countries to have the oversight in other countries and cooperation mechanisms. So what we recommend to countries is to establish at the regional level those mechanisms in order to facilitate the empowerment of regulatory agencies and to establish that minimum. So the example in Africa, we had 2 countries with ML3 18 months ago, Ghana and Tanzania. We have now 5. We'll have probably 10 in 2 to 3 years, and we'll probably have another 2 on top of that, very soon after that moment in time. We need to have AMA, because with AMA and 10, 12 countries and mutual recognition agreements for national regulatory approval of vaccines and medicines, we will be able to cover the entire African continent with a maturity level 3 equivalent regulatory system using the reliance mechanisms. So this is the difference, is that you don't need to go until the end, you don't need to go one by one until you have 194 member states. You need to act strategically at the regional level, developing the cooperation and implementing that. Just to give you an example of the numbers of what we have done during COVID-19, we had the first diagnostic approved 2 weeks after the declaration of the fake, the first vaccine approved by WHO 10 days after the approval of the European Medicines Agency. Between February 14, when we approved the SII and SKY Bio vaccines that were supposed to be the strongholds for the COVAX deployment, and the first deployment in Accra 2 weeks after, between those 2 dates, in 2 weeks, we had 102 countries with national regulatory approval for those vaccines. In total, in the 18 months of the peak of the response to the crisis, the 10 vaccines through 16 EULs were transformed in more than 5,400 national regulatory approvals in more than 160 countries. This is only possible with the reliance mechanisms, with the cooperation between regulatory agencies, with good coordination and a good cooperation. And we don't want to go back to 2019, honestly. We want to build on those strengths and to continue forward with what acquired during COVID-19. So WLA is really the response imposed by the member states to have a fair, transparent, and fact-based, evidence-assessed system that will replace the stringent regulatory authorities. There was a number of consultations, expert committees, and since March 2022, we entered the 5-year transition plan to move the now established regulatory authorities for the possibility of being WLA in that first period. The 3 countries that were given that status at first, the 3 of them participated in 3 different pilots because the 3 countries are 3 different situations, and we tested with those countries the different variabilities on the implementation of the WLA. So it's not by chance that we picked Swissmedic from Switzerland, HSA from Singapore only for medicines, or Republic of Korea with MFDS, both for medicines and vaccines. So it was a plan, it was implemented, it was tested. The result is not only the granting the status of WLA for those 3 countries, but it's also to speed up now that we have the final operational guidance established through those 3 countries for the next ones. And I can announce here that in our plan, we have a technical advisory group convened for April 2024 that will be reviewing between 33 and 35 stringent regulatory authorities. So we are hoping that by summer 2024, all stringent regulatory authorities have been evaluated to become WLA. And we have already in the plan 6 regulatory authorities that are not SRAs but want to move to WLA status to start to be assessed on the 2nd semester of 2024. So now it's going to change fast. It took time to establish the rules of engagement. Thanks to the first 3 countries, we tested all the possible variability, and now it's going to move, and it's going to be transformational because WLA will have major implications on the procurement. And of course, on the abridged pre-qualification or moving directly to the CRP in terms of establishing the national regulatory approvals to an abridged process using the WLA pathways. Just to tell you also that WLA is not, and the reliance mechanism I referred are not the only mechanisms that can be used. As most of you know, also just to remember, the Swiss medic procedures, or the EMA, European Medicines Agency, Medicines for All system, that allow also for fast-track approval for a number of medicines and vaccines according to the rules established there. So thank you so much for allowing me to explain some of these points. And before concluding, I just wanted to correct one of the slides from Morena. We are good friends, so I can say this in public. That slide from Boston Consulting Group, it's something that irritated me the day that Wellcome published. So I asked immediately the staff to do an analysis, and I have an Excel spreadsheet in my computer with the analysis to prove no, we never took 40 years for pre-qualifying a vaccine. So those numbers refer to the cycle between research and development and pre-qualification. And between the 2 points, in some of those vaccines, there are decades of stop between national approval and submission to pre-qualification. So just to keep the record straight on that one. Thank you.
Thanks very much for going through, I think, something that's now institutionally part of a system, the maturity level scheme. We're going to move immediately to the next session because we are running late and I don't want to stand between the session and dinner. So I think Patrick is actually, where's Patrick? Patrick is going to chair this one.
Thank you very much, Professor Scurry, for that meaningful presentation and also leading the session to all of our presenters. And as he just mentioned, we'd like to welcome him back up onto the stage. And for a brief introduction, we'd like to now turn our attention to challenges and way forward vaccine, pharmaceutical, and diagnostic manufacturing regulatory support. So now we'd like to welcome our presenters once we set up our tables and chairs. And this will be our panel discussion. So we do have our esteemed panelists once again. And first, we'd like to welcome Professor John Lim, Executive Director of Center of Regulatory of Duke NUS Medical Center. Please come up to the stage. And next, we don't have chair yet, so we'd like to briefly introduce who's going to be joining this session. Professor John Scurry, once again, will come up to the stage, and he's also a professor of the University of Melbourne. And Dr. Sudeep Kumar, Senior Vice President of Biological E from India, will join us at this session as well. So please come up to the stage. Thank you. And our moderator, Dr. Osawe, your seat is right here. Please come up to the stage. And I believe now we're all ready to start this discussion. Before then, let's welcome them once again with a big round of applause.
Thank you so much, everyone, again. And thank you to my colleagues on the platform here. Just to highlight that on the platform here we have John Lim, who was also formerly a regulator himself and then got into academia. John Skerritt was also the head of, so John Lim was the head of Singapore regulator, John Skerritt the head of Australian regulator, but now also in academia, and we have a manufacturer. So we have some of the best talents on the stage here to talk about some of the challenges and the experience that we face in terms of regulation. So I'll go first and ask John Lim to share some perspectives. John Lim first. Yeah.
They changed the order around.
Okay, well, I just wanted people to hear from me also be here, but go ahead. Go ahead.
looks like you've got me first because my slides are up. I'm going to look for the slide changer, actually. Is it over the other side? The remote control for the slides? Ah, I might come over there. Thank you. This is exciting having two podiums, isn't it? Because of time, I'm going to jump over a few slides, but this presentation for 5 or 6 minutes aims to be a bit of a discussion starter. And really, the focus is on manufacturing regulatory support, but many of the issues I'm going to cover really relate to regulatory support in general, and they come on some work from various perspectives. First of all, in about 2015, my agency commenced a program of support for regulators in the Asia-Pacific region. We realised that a lot of important medicines for malaria, TB, HIV, AIDS were being held up, especially as countries graduated from a global fund, because of lack of capacity within the national regulatory systems. We then ramped up that work of regulatory support during the COVID pandemic. And I'll also share a few reflections. I actually have about 35 years in development assistance experience, including 11 years as deputy head of one of Australia's government development assistance agencies. I know it's a funny mixture of medicines regulation and development assistance, but maybe not. So I'll jump to about slide number, this one. And I want to talk about some of the things that really stimulated and were our learnings about what partnerships worked. And it was really important to actually listen to the needs of the partner countries, rather than come in with a written agenda based on a program plan. Respect the decisions of the partner countries and listen closely as to why things might be done a certain way. Don't try to impose your way of doing things. Make sure that events and training activities are genuine partnerships, not just the agency coming to teach. It's important to have delivery in local language. Even though some of your partners may have several languages, it's important to use local language to try to get to as many people in the agency as possible. And build wider collaborations. I think we'll be talking about this later. Other regulators in the region and international partnerships through Reliance can be critical. Industry is important because they actually, especially if you have a local medicines or vaccine manufacturer, they actually have experience in those new technology areas and they can provide access to evaluation reports. And local research institutions often have highly skilled, internationally trained people among their professors and lecturers who can advise on specialist technologies or indeed support reviews. But there are some challenges. It's important, and this is probably the most important challenge in capacity development, make sure your project has exit routes. Make sure that you develop a model. Don't try to build a US FDA in a country with a annual income of $2,000 US. So you've got to have a model that persists after the project finishes. Again, don't propose processes such as review or manufacturing inspections that can't be resourced post-project. Work out what the wishes, capacities and skills of your partner are. Generally, you have 3 or 4 champions, but there needs to be mechanisms, for example, training in local language, to make sure that the capacity building engagement is wider. Work within the systems, listen closely, and make sure you help the countries engage in regional and international mechanisms. And I know we'll be talking about that later. A lot of opportunities here. We talked about the importance of learning by doing. And it's really important to provide regulatory support within an actual context. It creates a greater sense of purpose if you're actually reviewing a particular product together rather than abstract training on how to review products. Sometimes smaller targeted projects may be looking at one part of medicines testing or one part of evaluation or one part of pharmacovigilance are a good endpoint rather than trying to reform the whole system overnight. But if you are doing a bigger program, connect with a wider health system. One of the challenges we have in many countries is that regulators are isolated from the wider health system. Strengthen the existing institutional mechanisms, but do understand limitations, such as challenges in regulatory reliance. Important to understand how they can recognise, if that's their model, major regulatory decisions, but very importantly, build on existing regional collaboration mechanisms. Encourage regulatory reliance, and we have the WHO definition here, and we've talked a lot about reliance this afternoon. But there's different models for reliance. It's not just, here is your reliance model, take it away. And I think it's important to say that even well-resourced agencies, including, we've heard, 2 agencies that operate at maturity level 4, for example, are within the Access program, Singapore and Switzerland. And so, and TGA also uses reports from other regulators. So regulatory reliance is not just a model for ML2 or even ML3 or ML1 regulators. It's a model that ML4 or, in the old system, stringent regulators do use. It can be unidirectional, however, if you're a less well-resourced regulator. Both actually require capacity development because cultural change is so important, as well as understanding how to read and review and successfully use an evaluation report. And finally, I just want to touch on what might be some barriers to implementation of regulatory reliance. And these are sometimes technical in nature. It can be the product that you're actually looking at, say, for an Asian regulator, is actually manufactured at a different site from the one that, say, EMA might have evaluated in Europe. It can be hard to get those reports from some regulators, especially if they have heavy redactions in them. And one of the biggest challenges, I actually think, is a third one. The evaluators within your agency may see it as downskilling, and they may be hesitant to utilise reports from other regulators. Finally, there's a challenge with bespoke or unique national requirements, whether the requirement for local lab testing, the use of CPPs, the need to translate submissions into local language, or specialised local labelling requirements. None of these barriers are insurmountable, but I think we need to go in with our eyes wide open and consider how we can address them. Thanks very much. I'll finish there.
Thank you very much, John, for those illuminating points about regulations and some of the issues and the way forward. The next will be John Lim.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick. I'd also like to thank the organizers. It's a delight to be back in Seoul, only 3 months since I was here at the global, the other bio conference that MFDS hosted. And I'd like to thank the Ministry of Health and Welfare and WHO and, of course, ADB for bringing me back. Now, I'd like to sort of give you just a few thoughts in 6 minutes about multi-sectoral partnerships, and it's really to talk about what we've been doing with the ADB in the last year or so. But I want to preface my statements by this broad philosophical comment that good regulation is very important for sustainable development, especially when you're thinking of the UN Sustainable Development Goal 3. And this is something in my Center of Regulatory Excellence at the Duke National University of Singapore Medical School that we always emphasize to participants of our programs, whether for education or think tank, that regulation has far wider implications, and we've seen this during the pandemic. And so, of course, it is important that the regulators themselves see this, but also the governments, and not just at national level, but also regional and globally. And there is this fulcrum of smart regulation where you do want to protect the public, but you also want to enable and facilitate. Now, my center has had the privilege to work with the ADB for 2 projects since 2015. There was an earlier project where we were focusing on the Greater Mekong sub-region from 2015 to 2017, where we looked at the regulatory systems in those countries, and we provided roadmaps and reports to the countries and to ADB. But the current project that we're doing started last year, and it's focusing really on vaccine regulation and manufacturing in the context of COVID, but looking to the future for pandemic preparedness. And so it's an ongoing project. And what we are doing in this particular project is to really look at achieving sustainable vaccine access with a focus on manufacturing to strengthen the regulatory systems to enable equitable vaccine access. So you can see in the orange boxes some of the products that we are intending to bring out once the project ends. And this is to lay the foundation for attracting and achieving sustainable investments in manufacturing, especially in low-resource settings for vaccines, to enable equitable access to innovative health products, and also to build regulatory resilience for future public health emergencies. We're specifically looking at Bangladesh, Indonesia, India, Korea, and Singapore as reference points as we study the landscape. And what is significant to this particular meeting is that just about 6 weeks ago, we organized a vaccine seminar in our medical school where we invited representatives. There were about 130 representatives in the room. It was a fairly small amphitheater. And these represented 14 developing member countries of the Asian Development Bank and also vaccine manufacturers from 8 countries. And they're all listed at the bottom of the slide. And the aim was to share knowledge and best practices to amalgamate vaccine science, policy, regulation, and practice. So we were privileged to have the Honorable Minister of Health and Family Welfare from Bangladesh deliver the opening speech, and the Secretary of the Department of Animal Husbandry and Dairying from the Government of India, who gave a very interesting keynote address that focused the participants on the issues of One Health and animal health in vaccine development. And once she gave that presentation, it sort of kept coming up during the sessions over the 2 days. And you see a list of the multi-sectoral representatives who are present at that particular workshop in Singapore. So the key messages that came out at the end of the 2 days were that COVID-19 has highlighted the importance of amalgamating science, policy, and practice for timely, equitable vaccine access for future public health emergencies. What is also very important is that a vaccine strategy has to be collaborative and it needs to be fit for purpose if we're thinking of advancing sustainable vaccine manufacturing and regulatory agility in the Asia-Pacific. We've heard this many times today. We need to strengthen multi-sectoral collaborations to enhance our health system resilience, and we need to collaborate at the scientific, technical, and regulatory issues at a broader and more impactful, to ensure that they're broader and more impactful at a global level. So we're in the process now of finalizing 4 policy briefs that will come out in the next few weeks. One on research and development for sustainable, locally relevant vaccine R&D in lower resource settings. A second one on manufacturing and other considerations of vaccine technologies, again in lower resource settings. Specific to this session this afternoon, there is a policy brief on fit-for-purpose, confidence-based regulation across the whole vaccine life cycle and looking at how do we strengthen pandemic preparedness across Asia and the Pacific. And the fourth one is on building sustainable vaccine manufacturing practices in lower resource settings. So I just want to end with this slide, which just focuses on the third policy brief on regulation. Again, the title talks about fit-for-purpose, confidence-based regulation across the whole life cycle. And the 4 key points are that the pandemic has shown that regulatory resilience is extremely important for future pandemic preparedness, but the challenge is that regulatory strengthening and agility remain a challenge, particularly for lower resource countries. And so it's excellent that we now have the WHO systems there to provide an evidence-based approach, but bringing the parties together to strengthen regulatory systems and ensure agility for future public health preparedness is something we still need to look at collectively. Secondly, there has to be a mindset of a risk-based approach that is also supported by robust post-market monitoring frameworks. Thirdly, there has to be ongoing regulatory convergence and cooperation through confidence-based mechanisms and work-sharing arrangements. These are very key to regulatory agility and efficiency. And finally, again, we come back to that point that we need to strengthen multi-sectoral collaboration to enhance the resilience of not just the regulatory systems, but the health systems as a whole. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take part in the conversation later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John Lim. Dr. Kumar?
See, I have already made some of the presentation, but just to add up what both my colleague has mentioned, it is always a very good thing to have a good regulatory and the tight regulation to improve from both the sides. The first is from the infrastructure side and also with the quality point of view. And for the last few years, what I am seeing is in the vaccine manufacturing, WHO plays a very, very big role in terms of coordinating with the local NRA. So that is the major focal area in terms of in all Asian countries that there should be a proper align with the WHO that will definitely improve the quality as well as the system. What I have seen is in India that now our NRA has been in full supported by WHO, and that is the reason in India, if you see, there is a major number of vaccine which is approved by the WHO pre-qualification. So that is the one part which I will mention. So the good regulation and the tight regulation is very keen and important part. Now the other part which I will go is what doctor has mentioned, that it should be all integrated approach if we would like to fight during any pandemic situation or in case of an epidemic, where there is a huge collaboration is required between industry and the research institute, and even within the industry, a collaboration between R&D, manufacturing, regulatory, QA and QC that plays a vital role in terms of bringing the vaccine quickly. Until unless we have a collaborative approach, probably that is not at all possible. The third point which in my presentation also I have mentioned, during the case of a pandemic, we have to be very particular and careful in terms of the supply chain, where there should be a non-stop supply of all the material in terms of making. So even when you have a technology, when you have an approved product also in the market, until unless there is a regular supply of all these material is there, where there should be a proper guidance and policy from the government, as well as not only for the within the country, even outside the country. That is a very important tool in terms of fighting with any pandemic situation for the vaccine supply, because that is not going to be a limiting factor in terms of manufacturing and fulfilling the requirement as per the need. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. So everybody here on the panel and WHO, Dr. Gaspar have talked about regulatory reliance. It's such a critical thing. And I would like to hear from you, from the panelists here, what is the best way to achieve this? What is it can be done? What kind of investments is required to be able to strengthen reliance in our region? I'll start with you, John Skerritt.
Thanks, Patrick. I talked about a few approaches here. One is to continue to invest in regional reliance networks and, if necessary, establish new ones. Now, a trap would be to involve too many countries at once. So, for example, there's the ASEAN PPWG. There could be an opportunity developed for North Asia with other agencies in this area, and potentially in the Pacific, just to look at this part of the world. But keep them small. Show the fact that developed agencies, I mentioned the fact that Singapore, Switzerland and TGA are all involved in reliance and collaboration. Work really hard to break down the barriers internally. It's often the internal resistance to utilisation of other agencies' reports that actually is a source of failure. Learning by doing is very important. Actually go and do it for a project, even if you have to modify processes as you go. And my final message, a lot of countries will say, look, we can't really do reliance because our legal systems aren't harmonised, aren't aligned. You don't need that. You can actually work, I mean, the Australian system is not the same as the Swiss system for the review of medicines, and yet we work together. It's not the same as the Singaporean system or the European system, and yet we have reliance mechanisms. So it's a common mistake to believe that you have to have aligned laws and regulations. You can do regulatory reliance within your own framework.
Thank you. John Lim?
I totally agree with John Skerritt. And I think it's important, of course, in Singapore, we began using a reliance mechanism very early in the early 2000s. But what we found out in subsequent years as reliance began to be used globally was that, in fact, there are very specific country and regional issues that have to be addressed. And as Rogério said, during the pandemic, in fact, when there's an emergency, then all these kind of complaints or oppositions from even the staff of the regulatory agencies are all sort of set aside because of the urgency. But we also found during the course of the pandemic, we ran 2 workshops, mainly for Southeast Asian regulators, and we asked them, what is the issue when it comes to reliance, and we found that sometimes it's very, very practical. We just need to have training and capacity building. How do you actually look at a document or dossier from another regulator and the decisions that have been taken? And I completely agree that it has to be done at a regional level, but I think we also need to look into the very practical aspects of how do you rely on a document from another country. And without that, in fact, you find more of the opposition from the staff of regulatory authorities. I would also say that the Access Consortium is interesting because that is not purely within a region. It goes globally. Mid-sized regulators are working together. So in fact, you can look across regions as well. So I think these are some practical approaches.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to Dr. Kumar, but warn Dr. Gaspar that I'm coming to you also to try and respond to this. Dr. Kumar.
So I fully agree with both of my colleagues. There should be a proper reliance with the local NRA with the WHO. That helps a lot. From being an Indian, we have a very good reliance with the WHO, but definitely that required to be extended in all Asia-specific region in terms of making the product as per the WHO guideline and the requirement. That definitely going to help in terms of supplying of the vaccine. The second part is what doctor has mentioned, that maybe require a training or something. Yes, obviously, I mean, we were working very hard with the WHO for the last so many years. There was a lot of training program. There is a lot of support from the WHO that probably need to be extended to some of the country where the regulatory compliance may not be at par with the WHO. So that is also very, very important. And my second suggestion is that yes, WHO has done a great thing, particularly during this COVID situation, but that support and that the reliance with the local NRA need to be continued. It should not get diluted over a period of time, because we never know what will be the situation which will come up. So before that, we have to be well prepared with all Asian-specific country in terms of their reliance with the local NRA with the WHO. So that is only thing is what I can say.
Thank you. Dr. Gaspar?
So let me, first of all, let me say that there's a number of issues that I would love to discuss here, but I'm not in a position to discuss right now, because WHO is the secretariat, and the member states now have the main role. So from now until May 2024, we need to wait for the final political decisions from the member states in terms of the pandemic agreement. There's a number of technical issues that can be solved in one direction or the other direction, but for me to commenting on that right now would be interfering in the process that is in the hands of the member states. So I hope everybody understands that. This is what we call health emergencies preparedness and response that will come after the pandemic agreement and in the terms and conditions defined by the member states. But one thing that is quite evident for all of us right now is that when we talk about escalating emergency response on regulatory systems, you cannot escalate. Either they are there or they aren't. And so in terms of preparing for the future, I think that regulatory system strengthening has two main components. What we sometimes behind closed doors, and I shouldn't be using the words here, talk about wartime and peacetime. And let me refer to what we call peacetime, which is really universal health coverage and health for all. We should not forget that, and here we are talking about pandemic response in this conference, but the main critical issue that we have still today is about universal health coverage and health for all, because the medical products with quality and recognized under an adequate regulatory system are essential. There's no universal health coverage, no resilient health system without a strong regulatory system. And this is sometimes very difficult for some deciders to understand, and I think this in the room probably we have a completely different sample from the regular sampler in the other forum. Then one distinction that is important, and I heard some of you referring this, so I need to be very direct on this one. WLA and ML4 are not the same thing. So ML2, 3, and 4 are different stages of capacity building. WLA is looking at the reliance mechanisms performance and with the intention of having reliance for global procurement. So there's a listing exercise that is completely different from the other one. That's why we have a number of indicators that are on top of ML4 that need to be assessed to become WLA. But you don't need to have all the ML4 indicators to become WLA also. So there's two different pathways there. And also to say that now starts also a difficult issue for the global procurement agencies. And let me tell you what I was saying to some people on the management board of Global Fund last week. We will see probably in the next 18 to 24 months at least a couple of regulatory agencies that might become WLA for one or two specific regulatory functions, because the process allows that, allows a kind of slices approach for WLA. And if, for example, that will be about batch release or lot release for vaccines, of course, might be an important function for access, but probably not the best one for a procurement agency to recognize the authorization of that regulatory agency in terms of procurement. So there's a way that needs to be done now between the technical assessment that WHO is doing, which is transparent, published on the website with the different components completely individualized, and now the decisions for the procurement agencies in terms of facilitating access. And to the question about how to implement that, I think that the most important issue that was not referred explicitly here today is trust. And trusts, you build trust, it's not acquired. It needs to go through different iterations. I think that COVID-19 was a very good exercise to develop that trust. And we need to take that opportunity to move forward and not go back to 2019. We don't want to go back to 2019 in terms of the cooperation and convergence. I have a number of years less than John on the regulatory, but I have already almost 3 decades there. And I never saw the regulatory system so aligned and so cooperative and so convergent like on COVID-19. So let's take that opportunity. And one specific example that I would like to mention, the most difficult moment in my functions at WHO during this process was not when we didn't have vaccines, because when we didn't have vaccines, we didn't have alternative. It was when we had vaccines, and we had specifically a member state donating 500 million doses to the COVAX facility, and for 2 weeks we were discussing about the regulatory documents, because the federal legislation of that country doesn't allow for federal documents to be shared with outside entities. And for 2 weeks, we were there discussing with lawyers about how to have those inspection reports and those regulatory documents, because each country is a sovereign country, and each national regulatory authority needs to have the option to decide if it's going to approve or not, based on documents and based on evidence, not based only because the product is approved by regulatory agency A or regulatory agency B. And I think I said already too much today. Thank you.
Thank you. So in closing, first I'd like to come back to what John Lim said, that regulation is actually the major part in sustainable development. If you have a strong regulator, there's significant investment in the pharma sector. And because of the significant investment in the pharma sector, there's a lot of skill building in the sector. There are lots of jobs that are being created in the sector. There's a lot of other countries outside the country, other companies outside the country that can come and do contract manufacturing in the country. So it basically changes the dynamics of the country. So regulation is more than just medicines, but the wider impact that it has on society is very, very, very significant. So I would like to thank my panelists here. Thank you so much for taking the time to prepare for this, and also the new information and the knowledge that you shared with the group. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give a big round of applause. Thank you very much for your insight. Please now return to your seat. Ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow we will commence with session 2 through session 4, starting at 9 a.m., centered around the critical topic of accelerating the development and production of therapeutics, diagnostics, and vaccines. We eagerly anticipate your interest and participation in these sessions. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to remind you all that the welcome dinner will take place in the Grand Ballroom on the 3rd floor, starting at 6:40. For those who joining for the dinner, please make your way to the 3rd floor at the Grand Ballroom. And ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to welcoming you to an enjoyable evening. Once again, this brings us to the end of session 1 of the Bio Summit 2023. Thank you very much for your participation.